All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us. We're so glad to have so many of you on for our very first opening of the Redesign Your Future series. So while we have people joining, I'd like to kick off our first poll to see who's on today. So we have our panelists here, and we have about 79 participants, and we're going to have more joining. So we just want to get a sense of who's here with us today. We've invited and opened this up to anyone that wants to join. Just want to know who's here. It's good to kind of see who's on the call with us. All right, so I see lots of numbers moving. All right, and it's a good mix of Hopkins and non-Hopkins attendees. All right. I still see some numbers moving, so let's not end the poll just yet. Okay.
Should we fill in too, or are we allowed to?
We know your we know your affiliations. All right. Very good. Okay, so let's go ahead and we can go ahead and end the polling. Looks like we've got oh, we still got some votes coming in. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead, for sake of time, we'll go ahead and well, we'll share the results. So we have quite a bit of Hopkins attendees, so that's great. And we've got some non-Hopkins folks. Looks like primarily we've got some non-JHU admins and staff and faculty joining us, and then maybe some other people that are not associated with Hopkins. So thank you all for joining us today in today's webinar. I apologize for my lighting. I came into the office today because I have some unstable internet at home with large webinars, and there's no power in the office. There's no lights or AC, so I have a fun little lamp in front of me to provide some lighting. So that's why I look a bit orange. So I apologize for that. But you know, 2020, what can you do? You be resourceful. So to get us started, before I kick off to our panelists to get our discussion going, I just wanted to start our conversation and redesign your future with a note that we are here to talk about reframing. And today's discussion is all about reframing. And in order to do that, we need to acknowledge where we are today and where we are in this year. So it's been 214 days since the first traced case of COVID-19 back in November 17th, 2019. And it's been 24 days since George Floyd was killed, yet 400 years of oppression in our country. And we are currently at a 14% unemployment rate in the United States. But in the spirit of reframing and today's conversation, we've also seen, especially in the last few weeks, solidarity and inclusion through the protests that have been happening throughout the country and throughout the world with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and others who have suffered and died. And we've seen progress made in care and treatment through COVID-19. And recently, we're seeing progressive outcomes made through Supreme Court cases. So we're seeing the 2020 that we've joked about being canceled, but we're also seeing a turn being made. So there's a shared sense of loss, there's collective trauma, uncertainty, and isolation. And the Redesign Your Future Digital Summer Retreat series was created so that we can come together and we can share tools and techniques to reimagine the world that we want to live in and be a part of. And so this is our time to hear stories, share stories from others, from our alumni that so graciously are here today, and to recalibrate and strategize. And so there's one certain vision for our future, and it is the one that you create yourself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We've given some questions, but I really would like this to be a discussion. I've got some questions for you all, but I also want us to kind of have it be a free-flowing conversation. Feel free to ask questions to each other. Feel free to ask questions to me. We're going to go to our chat box, so feel free to our participants and attendees listening. Feel free to use the Q&A and upvote questions. We have staff members who are monitoring the Q&A, so feel free to upvote questions and answers and chat amongst yourselves in the chat box. So if we could just go around and introduce our panelists and just tell a little bit about your careers. We have a wide variety. We wanted to make sure we had a wide variety of industries represented, and just introduce yourselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to start over here with Evan, and we'll kind of go around.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning to wherever folks are dialing in from. So my name is Evan Fowler. I was undergraduate at Hopkins and I graduated in 2013. I also did the 5-year bachelor and master's degree program with the Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, which I graduated from in 2014. Multiple Hopkins campuses represented. Since I graduated, I've worked in the kind of nonprofit think tank world in Washington, D.C. for a little while before I transitioned to working with the U.S. government, first at the U.S. Department of Commerce in the Foreign Commercial Service, helping U.S. companies export abroad and working on commercial diplomacy. And then after that, and currently with the U.S. Department of State, where I work as a foreign service officer, currently assigned as an economic officer at the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Great. Let's move over to Reggie.
My name is Reginald Vanderman. I have been with Hopkins too long, but just celebrated my 25th anniversary as a registered nurse this past May. My very first job was at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I also had the privilege to go to Hopkins. I came in as an associate, 2-year degree, actually took over 3 years as an associate, and then I did my BSN at Hopkins in 1997. Took some time, off, came back and did the MBA, MSN program. After that, I came to Children's to work almost 16, 17 years ago. Came in as a manager, and I'm now the director for the division, running about $50 million in budget per year. We do have an inpatient psych unit. I have a staff anywhere between about 80 to 100 staff members that report directly to me, including physician staff, fellows and residents that are in the program here at Children's Hospital, affiliated with George Washington University Medical School. So COVID has, changed our life quite a bit, and I'm sure after an introduction, we'll get to talk a little bit more about that and some of the projects that we're working on.
Thank you. Susan.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Susan Mack-Salmon, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Arts and Mind Lab in the School of Medicine at Johns Hopkins, part of the Brain Science Institute. And I've been working in that program, was one of the founders since about 2010. And we're really interested in how the brain changes on the arts, and that's art in all of its forms. So we are really looking at things like visual arts, dance, music. We also look at architecture and space, virtual reality, any kind of digital media. And we're really interested in how the brain changes and how those changes can help inform solutions in health, well-being, and learning. And so over the last 5 years, we've been doing quite a bit of research and really trying to understand some of the practical applications of the arts. So for example, things like dance and Parkinson's, or looking at music and lowering frustration and anxiety in Alzheimer's patients. During COVID-19 and also the social justice work that's happening, we've been looking really quite a bit at mental health and well-being, and also the role of the arts in social cohesion. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with each of you.
Great, thank you. And Pava.
Hey all, I'm Pava. I am definitely have been with Hopkins the least amount of time. I actually just graduated from my undergraduate in May. I know, well, last May, wow, already been a year. So I know one of the big premises of the Life Design Lab is that, you know, you don't want to start your career after you leave Hopkins, you should start designing it well at Hopkins. And that was very much indicative of my experience. Came to Hopkins wanting to be a physician, like very many people, and quickly realized that wasn't going to work out for a few reasons. One, couldn't stand blood, but two, I was really focused on how can you make big systemic changes. And it got me really interested in entrepreneurship. You know, how can you create a social entrepreneurial movement to make big changes within society? And so I started looking into entrepreneurship opportunities at Hopkins to discover that there weren't very many. And so my first venture was a nonprofit to kind of build out the Hopkins entrepreneurial community. So get an accelerator set up, get funding for student entrepreneurs, get the brand new entrepreneurship building, all of that infrastructure. And that got me really interested in just the generalized idea of entrepreneurial ecosystem development, which is definitely a very niche area, but it's essentially talking about how do we design systems, structures, and societies so that it is possible for people who want to create things to bring those into reality, regardless of their background, of their income, of their race, of their gender, etc. And so all of my work really focuses around entrepreneurship for economic development through ecosystem development. And so since Hopkins, all of my jobs have been, I've been self-employed. So I have 2 nonprofits and 2 for-profit companies. My main one is called EcoMap Technologies, and we use artificial intelligence to map out assets such as funding opportunities or accelerators or incubators in entrepreneurial ecosystems in the US and across the globe. And then my work with my main nonprofit is Innovate Maryland, which unites all of the different college and university entrepreneurial ecosystems in Maryland to provide support for our younger entrepreneurs. And so there has definitely been big changes in our field given COVID. Obviously, there has been horrible impacts on startups and small businesses. And now we're really tasked as, you know, a field to figure out how can we take this as an opportunity and leave COVID with a better footing for entrepreneurs to make it easier to restart businesses, to start new businesses, and get our economy going again. So really happy to be here and share any of those insights.
Great, thank you, Pava. So I want to go ahead and launch our second poll. So if I can get our next poll going. So we want to know, and this is particularly for our students on the group, and then for the first part of the poll, and then we have a second part of the poll that can be for anybody. We want to know, to get our conversation going, how has COVID-19 changed your summer plans? And this is multiple choice, and this is also anonymous, so we're not collecting this data on you personally. So this is anonymous feedback. So we want to know, how has it impacted you? But we also want to know, what do you have control over? So we'll just give a few more minutes, and this can also be, our panelists can participate in maybe the second part of the poll. So we just want to get a sense of, what are you experiencing right now? It's part of our theme of We Connect Here. Where are we connecting? What do we have in common? Oh, and I'm seeing it's not letting us vote unless you select an option under number 1. So if you are not a student and you want to participate in the second part, perhaps you can select no impact or unchanged if you really want to participate in the second part. Thank you for letting us know that. Okay, so I'm seeing slowing down in the answers, so perhaps we can share our results. All right, so I think because of that second question, we had maybe a blip, an impact on the no impact. So we see that we have several internships that have been canceled or offers being rescinded. Some people that are still searching, but a lot of focus on networking. So that's great to see. And what do you still have control over? So the reframe of your possibilities. So, the things that we can still control, what we have not lost in this year. So all these things that we want you to keep in mind, that we can still take care of our physical and emotional health, while that may be difficult at times, especially if you are impacted personally yourself with the virus. We still can take control and be intentional with this. We can keep in touch with our family and friends with that outreach, and reach out for support when we need it, and try to maintain that positive attitude. So all of these things, we still can, while it can be very difficult at times and trying, at times, and it may not be a daily thing, you can take that, remembrance when you can, in a moment that you can, and make these intentions. So thank you everybody for doing this poll. So I now want to just share really quickly, just to get into our discussion of reframing, the poem that inspired our month conversation, the What If 2020 Isn't Canceled. So this poem has gone viral a bit. So I don't know if you've seen this on Instagram. It's gone viral throughout Instagram. But what if 2020 isn't canceled? And this was by Leslie Dwight. So I'm just going to read this very quickly for you. So what if 2020 isn't canceled? What if it is the year that we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, and become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather the most important year of them all. So with that intention of reframing, I'm going to turn it back and fully back to our panelists now to have a discussion. So I'm not going to call out anyone specifically. Don't feel like you have to answer all of the questions. Just kind of answer as you want in any order that you want. So I'm going to kick us off with talking about our careers and thinking about the career aspect. So I just want to know, around your careers, we have different industries represented here. So how have you seen your industry changing in lieu of COVID-19 and in lieu of the world's current events? And have you seen your peers noticing any opportunities in the field? So how have you seen the world's events impacting your industry?
Well, I'll start and just say that I think the arts have never been more important. We, about 3 months ago, started getting inquiries from schools and from clinicians and from community organizations sort of asking how they could better understand the role of the arts and what the arts do from a neurobiological point of view around stress and anxiety, around thinking about unpredictability, about thinking about the way that we feel a sense of belonging when we're feeling so isolated. And so that's been sort of extraordinary. My work has been thinking about how to build a field around neuroarts or neuroaesthetics. And what we see now is people are gravitating towards aesthetic experience, like being in nature or finding soft, comfortable spaces, reevaluating their workspaces, thinking about the role of sensory smell or taste in ways that we hadn't really deepened into or broadened that portal. We recently launched something called the COVID-19 Field Guide that looks at arts in different, around different issues. And now we're launching something around social justice and the arts and the role of the arts in social justice. And so I think it's a real shout out for me to say that the arts are something that have always been with us, that I think we've sometimes marginalized in our very transactional world. But like exercise or sleep or good nutrition or spirituality, we need the arts. We need those kinds of ways to express ourselves and to understand others. So, and it was interesting, Reginald's work and Pava and Evan, I can see intersections between the need for entrepreneurial spirit in the times right now, thinking about the way that you work in other cultures to think about commerce. And then certainly in the clinical area, I think there's such a huge opportunity to help families at the Children's Hospital or clinicians find better ways to relieve symptoms or to look at prevention or well-being. So to me, our practice and our work has just gotten more relevant and I think more important when you think about what humanity really means and what it means to be human. So that's what I think.
And I would like to add to that, I think I'll make the comment that, sometimes out of adversity, you have to find the common good, right? Nobody ever thought that we would have lost 100,000 plus people. It's been quite difficult from a clinical perspective as a registered nurse when you watch the news every day. But you also ask yourself, this is what you sign up for. I've been a nurse for 25 years, and out of the 24 plus years that I've been, I've never had to deal with anything as drastic as COVID and losing people and watching on the TV. So definitely that has an impact, and not just on an individual basis, but our colleagues around the country, nurses that are dying, physicians that are dying from COVID. Also, just the staff that we work with. Some of them have parents, older parents. They live home with their older parents. So they have to make a choice. Do they have to come to work on a unit and take care of kids? But then how do they go home and then join their family? So it's been quite, I don't want to use the word traumatic, but challenging probably. And I think that this is where one has to think very, very quickly. So you walk in and now you have to do telepsychiatry. Normally we'll have months to decide how we're going to do it, how we plan it, what are the gadgets, who gets trained. Well, you have a few days to take a system and put it in place, right? Because now your physicians, you don't want them all in the unit, because if they do, guess what? If they get exposed, then you don't have anyone to take care of the kids. So you have to think outside of the box. I think what this year has really taught us is thinking outside of the box, and then also a lot of us, we like planning and, things that, and I'm not saying it's not a good idea. It's really good to plan, but this has really forced us to think outside of the box, so I'm sure it's a challenge for those that are like to plan and be in control. I mean, some of the things that we're saying, you're not in control of it. It's, you show up, it is what it is. You try to manage the best as you can. And you mentioned mental health. I think it's critical. All of us, we have to find a medium to take some of the stress that we're having, whether through the arts, yoga, mindfulness, exercise, spirituality, whatever it is. We have to find a channel. And I don't want to be the only one talking, but I can share some of my experiences, getting calls that you're like, oh my God, what call did I just get? And then working through it and coming to the other side, and you say to yourself, wow, it was scary, but I survived and I'm here and I can share with someone. So I'll let somebody else from the panel also speak, please.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe underscore what Reggie had said. This kind of concept of it's something that you signed up for, right? Because I think when we think about our careers, when we think about things that we're passionate about, as Reggie and Susan have both said, right? Even amongst these challenging times, right? There's significant opportunities for us to use our expertise and to kind of double down on our passions to try and add value to such a traumatic or such a unprecedented time. You know, for us in the diplomatic space, you know, working at an embassy in the economic section, we generally have kind of two responsibilities. The first is kind of related to trade and investment, right? So helping, you know, U.S. companies navigate a really significant and turbulent period in countries around the world. And then we have another section that deals with health science and technology cooperation, which I think has never been greater than it is at this time. So, you know, again, happy to talk more, but, you know, things like bringing ventilators, spare ventilators from the United States to Indonesia to help, you know, Indonesia address its own pandemic situation, working with them to try and improve data collection and transparency, working with them to help treat some of the underlying conditions that might put people more at risk in Indonesia through emergency assistance and long-time development assistance. You know, these are things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, while also trying to understand, you know, what is an emerging market economy going to do if the financial market collapses, if there's capital outflows, if the currency tanks, if people become, you know, as scared as they did during previous financial crises in Indonesia, and reporting that and sending that back to Washington so that, you know, hopefully our senior leadership can make better informed decisions, right? Those are the types of value added that I think, again, as Reggie said, is part of that, something that you signed up for, where you can really try and make a difference. At the same time, I'm curious to hear from panelists and from attendees as well. I think you know, these times have also produced a tremendous administrative change in government work. I think particularly around the use of technology and the ways in which we can be more productive by using technology, because the government is one of the last to adopt new technologies. So, you know, one of the things that we've been working on is doing virtual trade missions, where we're able to get ministers and members of parliament in Indonesia to talk directly to U.S. executives, U.S. company representatives that are interested in kind of helping them and in highlighting the good work that they're doing. So, you know, being able to use platforms like Zoom, like Cisco, like Google Meet, is something that, you know, is really different than trying to crowd 40 to 50 members of a large delegation into a small Indonesian meeting room. So that allows us to have more access, allows us to better advocate on companies' behalves and to kind of share best practices with our Indonesian colleagues. So again, I think that that's a tremendous area of change, and hopefully, you know, God willing, once the pandemic subsides, you know, it'll be able to stay with us to encourage more flexible work arrangements, to be able to use these type of more innovative diplomatic tools to reach a wider population that we're trying to interact with in Indonesia.
Yeah, to kind of underscore your point, this isn't directly with government, but we were working with one of the biggest international healthcare organizations, and obviously a very big bureaucracy, much like a government. And typically, you know, a young, small company like us would never even get considered as an approved vendor. But because of COVID, you know, we had a service that no one else could provide, and so they were able to fast track us through that vendor approval process. And I've heard a few similar stories from other entrepreneurs who have been working with some state and local governments, specifically, you know, around the procurement of PPE. And so it has been promising that we have seen a lot more movement from the big institutions to try to support these entrepreneurs and businesses, even if it is mostly self-serving because they need the technology. So I likewise hope that that is a trend that continues, especially after we end, because one of the things we're really worried about in our field is that there's a really big focus right now on supporting entrepreneurs and supporting young companies and making the, you know, funding more available, especially when you're looking at, you know, African-American founders. There is so little funding of the stimulus package going to them right now. So there's a lot of attention on these issues. And one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we ensure that this attention continues past the pandemic, especially on, you know, our small businesses and encouraging people to buy local and encouraging local procurement. How do we keep up that focus when there is no longer this immediate threat and danger of the pandemic? And so, you know, kind of to your point, Reggie, the uncertainty is actually something that hasn't impacted entrepreneurs as much because that is the world in which we live. We are not used to there being very stable conditions, and we know business can change on a dime. But we actually have seen a very interesting kind of bifurcation between people who are very used to uncertainty, who are pursuing more like high growth startup models, where that's the name of the game, it's all uncertain, versus our more small business owners who are also entrepreneurs, but you have had stable revenue and stable income from your business for the last 20 years, and now suddenly you don't. And so it's been really interesting as a field to see how all of these different ecosystems, whether they are cities, states, and towns, have had to, you know, meet the needs of both of those different groups. And so really what our field is focusing on in light of COVID is how do we make it, you know, first, just possible to be an entrepreneur right now. A lot of stores who otherwise have perfectly fine business models are being threatened to go out of business because they have, you know, 5% of their typical sales per month. So how do we immediately address that to make sure that people can stay in business? But more importantly, once this immediate, you know, pandemic ends and we can start to reopen more fully when it's safe, how do we make the entire ecosystem more friendly and more equitable for starting a business? How do we ensure that anybody who wants to go start a business can actually access the funding that they need? Because that has been a problem in our field since its beginning, right? It has never been as easy for Black founders or female founders or immigrant founders to get the money that they need to get started and to get to the support that they need. And so really what we're focusing on is keeping everyone alive right now, but also planning for the future so that when we reopen, we are not just perpetuating all of the inequality that we have seen so far in entrepreneurship. And so it's been a really interesting challenge. And also, you know, on the point of mental health, it's been really hard to be in this space because everyone who works in entrepreneurial ecosystem development loves entrepreneurs. We love these businesses. We love working with them. Hell, most of us are entrepreneurs ourselves. And so it's been super hard to need to kind of be on our A game while at the same time constantly hearing about businesses that we're working with shutting down. And so it's been a really interesting balance between those things.
You know, I just like to add to that. You know, in Baltimore in particular, it's a very difficult ecosystem for entrepreneurs. I started 2 companies. I am an entrepreneur, and the Baltimore funding community was incredibly chauvinistic, really difficult to work in, and really showed, I think, a lot of favoritism in a way that made it impossible. And I cannot relate to what it's like to be a Black woman or a Black man and have that kind of discrimination times a million, right? And so I think what I hear you saying is that there's also a fatigue that you have, that we all have, even though, you know, the world is changing so dramatically and there's a lot of adrenaline, we're all also really tired. And I think, you know, Black Lives Matter sort of lifting up in all of this is sort of extraordinary. And so to your point about how do we keep it going after the pandemic? Well, first of all, I don't think we know when the pandemic's going to be over, right? We may be living with this for a very long time, but I think it's about personal change too, so that you no longer can live the way you did before. And that when you have individual change, you ultimately have community change and you have collective consciousness change, regardless of the leadership that's in the city, the state, or the federal government, or in other countries. And I think we each have to be able to voice what matters to us. There's this term called just world. It's a social psychology sort of philosophy that we all sort of operate, or most of us operate on this principle of a just world, that maybe it's not just now, but it could be and it should be, and that we're all moving towards that. And I think that's a really important concept to think about as we move into seeing what really is there, not the way the history books are written, but not the person that got there first to be able to document something or the winner, but what is the world look like and what needs to change for it to be just. So I'm super interested in that too. So.
Great.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to move to our question and answers from the attendees, but feel free to add, Reggie.
No, go ahead. No, you do that, and I'll chime in later.
Excellent. All right. So we're getting some upvotes in the Q&A. So, and I see things that are very specific to students and alumni. And so just going into the Q&A. So we've got some upvotes on Beth Olson's question of where do you see professional opportunities for students and alumni in areas that are growing in your sectors?
So I can speak to entrepreneurship broadly as well as entrepreneurial ecosystem development. So one of the things, and I think this applies to both Beth's questions and Mary Ann's, is that hiring and working for startups and small companies is an entirely different ballgame than hiring and going and working for a big firm. And one of the big ways you see that is that startups, small companies don't have the capacity to go out there to job fairs, to get in front of these big institutions, to put as much of the manpower behind hiring. And so obviously when it comes to the world of working for startups, I'm a really big proponent of it. I think especially for students who are trying to see what they want to do, because working for a small young company, you are going to put your hands in so many more buckets than if you were going to go into a corporate role. You're just going to be in charge of a lot more things. And so whether or not startups are hiring right now, again, is pretty bifurcated. Was your business model helped by the pandemic or was it hurt? And that's really the reality that we're seeing. But for all of the ones that were hurt, and there were many, there are also a ton of companies who have benefited from this. You know, if you want to look at the big ones like Zoom, right? Or we have a company in Baltimore called Hungry Harvest who delivers, you know, ugly produce meal boxes, and they've been booming. And so for students who are interested in maybe wanting to try their hand at working, you know, for a startup, for a younger company, the main thing I would recommend there is that it is on you to reach out, right? A lot of times they aren't going to go put their jobs on all of these job boards, right? As a founder, hiring is the most important thing I do, and it is the last thing on my to-do list to go out there and advertise it because there are so many other things to be focusing on. And so if you have a company or an area that you're interested in, I would look up small startups and companies and just actively reach out, see if they have open positions, because it's less of those positions don't exist because they aren't advertised, and much more of it's harder for startups to get those out there. In terms of ecosystem development, unfortunately, it's a very again, part of the field is in government, and there's been a lot of government hiring freezes for these things, but also economic development agencies. I've seen at least a few across the country who are increasing their hiring in preparation for this. But again, it's not something you can kind of speak to in general terms because ecosystem development ranges from the government to individual entrepreneurs to nonprofits. So pretty, not homogenous field.
Yeah, from a clinical perspective and recruitment of staff like nurses and whatnot, it's very interesting because the adult hospitals, rather unfortunately, or because of COVID, there's an overflow, right? There's tremendous number of people that need help. On the other side, on the pediatric perspective, for example, children's, we were told that we needed to cut down all of our surgeries. We're roughly about a 300-bed hospital. We were told that we have to double our beds to about 700 if COVID was totally out of control. So there were a lot of contingencies that we put in place. You spoke about hiring freeze. Yes, we're still interviewing, but we're not able to offer positions yet because, again, then you hear about the second wave. Well, we're not quite sure. So there's a bit of uncertainty. I think that if you ask my opinion, even though I'm a nurse, I really read up quite a bit and, on business, right? So the work is not just nursing. There's also a business component to it. And so the outlook, it looks good, but the fear of the unknown of the second resurgence of the COVID going into the fall is a big factor. I mean, hopefully we can get a vaccine out so that we can get people vaccinated, and then we can go about our business as usual. So that is where it's sort of like a tipping point, and I think as far as ingenuity, if you want to start a business, I don't own a business. Well, I do own, something on the side, but if you're trying to start, like they said, you should try to go out and look at the market and what is doable. I think there are some areas, especially in healthcare, that is going to be like contact tracing, right? They're looking for people because if we don't get a vaccine and we have to do more contact tracing, these are the areas. I mean, you hear about sometimes some states talking about tens of thousands of people that they want to recruit, because if you don't have a vaccine and you have to go out and do contact tracing, then you need the people. Then we need people like Pava, who has the technology that can help us, so that yes, we may be able to work even from our home, but we're able to still contact trace, using a cell phone. We're able to reach someone and say, hey, you had dinner at such and such place. Guess what? The person that served you, right, unfortunately, they've been exposed to COVID. We're going to have to ask you to self-quarantine for 14 days. These are the tips. We'll check in with you day 3, day 7, day 10, just to make sure that you're doing well. And God forbid, if things don't improve, you may need to go to the hospital. Please contact me so we can still follow up on you. So I think that there are some opportunities, even in this space. The question is, how long would that be, right? If you get a vaccine and you're starting a new program and you've invested, then what happens? So it's sort of a little bit tricky, a tipping point, but I'll say one should not just sit, right? I mean, in life, sometimes you have to take chances. I mean, if you look at some of the most successful companies in the world, it came on a piece of paper, somebody's thought, and then they were able to talk to someone or put it into planning, and then execute the strategy and make sure that it's working. So it's a little bit tricky, but I think there are opportunities out there. For example, clinical nurses. I mean, now we had to stop the nurses from coming into the hospital, right? Nursing students, because we don't want them to be exposed to COVID, right? But we also recognize that they have to get their training, and we need more nurses, right? Because there's already shortage of nurses in America. We need more nurses. So how do you use maybe technology to allow these nurses, they may be far away, but they can still do their clinicals by using a virtual mode to be able to see how you may work with a patient. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's still at least something in the interim that can help them and get them to graduate so that they can be more resources that we can count on, because we definitely need more nurses. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So that's what I can share from our perspective.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just quickly maybe add, for government work and particularly for the Foreign Service in the State Department, there's a fairly kind of complex hiring process. But I think what maybe this has shown is that there's like a significant opportunity for folks who may have an interest in public health and global epidemiology, to be able to bring those talents to bear for the government, since a lot of what we've been reading from folks in the kind of aid and assistance realm is that they see this similar to the kind of government's kind of turning point after 9/11, when there was a significant amount of investment in counterterrorism programs and in education opportunities oriented towards students and professionals that were interested in building up their repertoire related to those areas, to global studies, to global languages, to things of that nature. So I think there will be a similar shift, even if the hiring doesn't change dramatically. And the other thing that I would say, and kind of related to what some of the other panelists have said, I think there is this maybe not reckoning is the best word, but this kind of discussion taking place within the State Department and within all agencies of government to do more than kind of point to existing programs on diversity and inclusion, right? To really reckon with maybe some of the larger systemic and institutional challenges within our respective organizations. So, you know, within the Foreign Service, we have this maybe not old time mantra that, you know, the Foreign Service was long pale, male, and Yale, to kind of refer to this kind of pedigree that had long existed. And you know, there's been a lot of movement to try and change that, to try and create a State Department that more reflects what America looks like, because, you know, what we want to be presenting to the rest of the world is that the United States is this kind of collection of different opinions and different voices and different backgrounds, and so there's, I think, a conversation, you know, taking place now, as it is in many organizations, which is how can we move forward in a way that builds on that doesn't, you know, that doesn't tokenize, that doesn't, you know, require heavy lifting from folks, you know, who may already be in positions, but instead tries to kind of uplift and actually create a long-term solution to what we still see in our department, which is, you know, related to promotions, related to senior leadership roles, related to, you know, what embassies, you know, who is staffing different embassies, things like that. So it's an ongoing conversation, and I think, you know, something that we also look to, you know, students that are interested in careers at the State Department, to kind of help bring in along that kind of technology and innovation that comes with a younger mindset. But how can we again kind of translate this really positive momentum into concrete action that can be taken by us as an institution?
Thank you. So I'm curious to see, so I think one of our other questions that has popped up in the questions and answers from the attendees, so if you've already addressed this, don't feel like you need to reiterate, but if there's any new information you can add, is what kind of entry level? So for the undergraduates that are on, that don't have any work experience, aside from internships and things that they've created, volunteer experiences, what advice do you have for our graduating students or those that are seeking internships? We saw internships being canceled and offers being rescinded in our poll, searching in the next, you know, few months. So if you have any additional insights, because we already had some great information that you shared, so this is just an add-on to those that are particularly in that undergraduate population with very little work experience.
I can just add that, you know, Hopkins in the School of Medicine has a hiring freeze right now. And so that's very challenging, but we've been able to bring on volunteers, people that are interested in putting their time in and getting experience virtually. And so they're doing literature reviews, they're writing blogs, they're doing participating in other kinds of forums and gatherings. And I think being very entrepreneurial during this time and just putting yourself out there, like, where can you be of service? Where can you put your passion to gain more experience? Whether you're paid or not. And I know sometimes that is not an option for everyone, but if it is an option for you, that can be something that does build your resume. I also think, to Evan's point, having some of these technology skills and experiences are really important, and there is so much great online learning available that is free, that it's really a good time to be a student and to keep, I mean, I'm a lifelong learner, I believe in lifelong learning, but to keep learning, to keep putting yourself in places where there may be certifications or just courses that you can complete or information that you can gain new skills to keep building your CV, keep building your resumes. I think you want to really do that. And that does make a big difference in how you come into the market, into the job market. And there's a lot of need. So looking at where you can go and help, you know, in terms of things as simple as working with food banks or working with delivery of different services that are available. Like, you don't always have to be in your lane in order to gain skills that transfer really well to where you want to be. I think structures are breaking down, right? Like, things are not the same and they're going to change. So really thinking about what skills you may not have that you need, that you might be able to get in an uncommon way, that you'll be able to ultimately move forward, is a way to think about it.
And I would echo the same sentiments by Susan, that volunteering, and in life there are certain things that when we go to school we want to do, but in the interim, doing something that may not be your life aspiration, but for a short period of time, this too shall come to pass. There's nothing that is going to last forever, right? We're in a very difficult, tough times. Even the discussion with George Floyd and many other things that are going on, diversity that we all talk about, is going to open many, many doors and abilities for people to be able to, work together. And, so my advice to anyone, yes, you know where your destination needs to be, but you may need to hitch a hike first before you can actually get to that destination, meaning that you may need to maybe do delivery for a short period of time, right? Maybe 3 months. But then once we get a vaccine and things start improving, anybody that has watched, the US economy was very robust until COVID came. It was about 3 or 4% unemployment. And COVID was the thing that really took us down. So, if we were to get a vaccine, I think that the numbers are going to go down astronomically. I can't tell you, all our meetings used to be in person, but because of Zoom, we don't meet in persons anymore. We do almost everything through Zoom now. So thinking outside of the box, like I said, telepsychiatry. If anybody told me that within a few days we would have to put a program together, just buying iPads, Zoom was there. That was the connection. And now we can see patients. If you look at the number of, even because of this, we're seeing more patients through telemedicine and telepsychiatry than we've ever done. So there are many, many opportunities that will come along. We're just in a very, very precarious and a very difficult situation right now. But I'm very, very optimistic that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that we will definitely come out on the other side having learned some lessons about how to manage. There is always going to be the debate about, from a clinical perspective, I'm a clinician, so I can talk from a clinical. If you ask my opinion, I think there were things that we could have done earlier. As a nurse, I don't want to come to work and feel like I don't have the things that I need to do my job. Simple thing as having a mask to be able to wear so that I don't contact, COVID whilst I'm working with a patient, or a goggles, to be able to utilize that to do my job. These are non-negotiable. And I'll make the analogy. When you put a police officer to go and work, and a bad analogy to use in these times, but they will never go out there without having a gun or whatever other tools that they need to do their job. So why would we send a nurse, a social worker, a medical doctor, a technician, for that matter, into a work environment that they don't have the tools that they're going to be able to use to do their work? So those are some of the things that we can always debate about. But hopefully, I'm very optimistic that we'll learn through this process, and on the other side, be prepared as a nation should we face this on a resurgence or going forward, because there will be many more events. This is not going to be the end of it all. It's really bad, but there may be potential things that will come that will even be worse. And as a nation, are we prepared from a clinical perspective to manage? The US is one of the best countries in the world. And when you hear about us having to order masks from China, why don't we make them here? We have the ingenuity. We have the universities here. Why are we not making them here? Because of this, I've seen stuff in Baltimore that is being done, distilleries now doing hand sanitizers and whatnot. So it's a big awakening, if you ask my opinion, that we really need to reevaluate where healthcare is and what are our critical structures. And healthcare is part of our critical structure, the same way we think about the army, right? Because if you don't have a productive society and people are healthy to be able to work, how can they work and pay taxes so that we can do the other things that we want to do. So simple message, take what you can right now. Volunteer. I mean, that's another first step to get into the door. If they see you're doing a good job, as soon as they do the unfreezing, you have a job waiting for you.
I'll keep it short and simple. Sorry, Evan. Mine's one sentence. Build something or help someone build something, right? If you do not have a formal opportunity waiting for you right now, make your own. And that does not have to be a company. It does not have to be a nonprofit. It can be a website that aggregates information about where people in your community to go for resources. It can be a setup where you work with your neighborhood to arrange grocery pickup for your elderly community members, right? Take this time to build something that you've always wanted to build. And if you know, at the lack of other opportunities, that's a great way to spend time. And I know leading something on a resume is always going to be impressive. The fact that you were able to put something together and you were able to lead the charge. And so, yeah, that's my advice. Build something.
Yeah, and I would just say, I mean, it's a little bit tough because, you know, entry-level positions, at least in the Foreign Service, are far and few between because, you know, the average age of entry is maybe in the early 30s. But I think the question is what can you do in the meantime to build the skill set to be competitive for the hiring process, you know, later down the line. So, you know, the three most important skills, I think, for us are kind of your written analysis, right? So can you take a significant amount of sources and can you synthesize the information that they're given or that they're giving you into some type of actionable item for your country, for your government, and for your leadership at an embassy or at the State Department in Washington. The second is kind of oral communication, right? So how can you take that same analytical product and present it in a way that is actionable for those leaders? And then the last is written communication, right? Which is doing something that's similar. So, you know, all three of those skills can be developed in both in quarantine and in these kind of new normal circumstances. And so, you know, like folks have said, you know, volunteering is a good way to do that, you know, if it's possible. You know, when I finished my master's degree, I worked at a donut shop in DC for around 6 months while I was interning so that I could pay for my rent and expenses, and had to, you know, do that, you know, internship, not in the office, but, you know, when I would get home from shifts. So, and that eventually led to my first job offer after my master's degree. So again, it takes a little bit of kind of hustle and a little bit of gumption. But, you know, the opportunities exist, particularly for maybe cash-strapped companies that maybe don't have the financial resources at this time, but are still looking for that talent and are looking for folks that are motivated amongst the circumstances. The other thing that I would say, you know, particularly for my line of work is there's a significant amount of resources that are available to students and or to young professionals or folks who are, you know, recently graduated to help fast track you into entry-level government positions. So, you know, I did a program called the Presidential Management Fellowship. I can't, you know, speak anything but the highest praise for it. Since it really makes a complicated process really easy to streamline young people into government. But there are, you know, scholarships to get folks overseas to learn languages, things like the Peace Corps, and a lot of these have been suspended or, you know, are on a temporary hiatus. But that being said, a lot of them are also trying to shift into, you know, online formats that still provide the benefits of having done the program. So those things can give preferential hiring, you know, for U.S. government jobs, or open up a different, you know, job platform for you. So I did those. I think they're highly, highly recommended if you want to do government, because essentially what it's trying to do is try and give you any leg up in a system that is otherwise built to just kind of like take as many applicants as possible and try and sort through them in a way that doesn't always make sense. So what I always recommend folks is, like, if there's any way that you can get your resume to the top of the pile, or better yet, to circumvent that pile at all, it's going to be so much more advantageous for you, and still building that kind of skill set and that cross-cultural communication that becomes really important if you're considering a career in international relations, international business, or anything involving the federal government and diplomacy.
Can we stay on this question for just one more second?
Sure, yeah.
It's so important. I think, luck favors the prepared, right? And so I think we're all saying that is, even though you may not see the path that you thought you were on, continuing to really think about how you might zigzag your way to get to where you're going. And I don't know about everybody else on this panel, but my line has been anything but straight, my life course, my workforce. And I think it's a mythology to think that people that are successful got there easily, or got there simply, or that they knew where they wanted to go and they just got there. There's a lot of failing and learning and failing and learning. And I think that's the best thing that you can know, is that it's really the ability not to fall, but to get up and keep going. That is the most important thing. And this is a particularly intense time. And so I just wanted to speak for a minute about personal mental health and well-being and taking care of yourself, because we all are stressed. We all are anxious. We all are overwhelmed in our own way. And, there's a really interesting public health model around disasters, where, disasters have a beginning and an end. And there are different stages in that disaster model, like the grief model. Where you feel fine and you feel like you can handle it, and then the next day you're hopeless, and then the next day you're like, this is not that big of a problem, and then the next day you're like, okay, now I can really come to terms with what's in front of me. And so in COVID, and all of the other kind of economic issues and things that have fallen out from COVID, we don't know what the end is. And so our emotional life and our moods are changing very dramatically. And I think we have to honor the fact that we are in a very unpredictable time. So I ask myself, what do I have control over? And what can I do to manage the things that are important in my life? So sleep, food, making sure that I am able to connect to people that I care about, that I have something that I want to write, that I want to put out in the world. I can have some control over that. And I think for students, sometimes you feel out of control, like you don't have any control and you don't have anywhere to go. So I think it's really important to come back to what do you have control over, and also honor the fact that not every day you're going to feel great, and that you need to be able to take care of yourself more than ever, and to make sure that you're feeling well. So I think that's important too. And attitude and showing up and motivation, all those things matter regardless of what you're doing. So, those sort of basic tenets, foundational things, I think continue to be true in a time that's really hard for everybody.
Thank you, Susan. We have, we will be going until 1:30, so for those that are still on with us, I realize that some people might have to drop off at 1, but we will be going until 1:30. I see a couple more questions in the Q&A, and I have a couple more for our panelists. So Reggie already actually addressed some of this in your last answer, but I'd just like to pose to the group, how do you see this moment? Rachel Waxman brought this up in the Q&A. So how do you address this? How do you think this moment will see our world changing in a positive way? I know at our office, we've talked about how we see this changing when we do go back into the office in a more regular state. We can see how we're taking lessons from this moment and moving forward. So what positives are you bringing into do you think you'll be moving forward after we kind of return back to what is considered to be the normal past the pandemic?
All right, that's a tough question. I'll just say that I don't think we are going back to where we were. I think that what is in front of us, we're going to have very new opportunities. Like, where do we work from? You know, are we all going to work more from home? What does education look like? What does healthcare look like? I think this telehealth and really didn't take off in the 70s and 80s when we thought it would, but now it has. And so, can you lower? Can you change outcomes for under-resourced communities that didn't have access to healthcare? Can you help with things like compliance because you're more connected to your patients? Can you help with mental health because you have an opportunity to see what's happening in someone's home, like understand sort of more dynamic? So I think the future, there's so many things that we can do better. And I think we're seeing the spotlight of COVID has showed us how we haven't cared for our community in the way that we should have. And it was theoretical and maybe empirical before, but now it's real. You know, we're seeing people die at rates that are unimaginable and unconscionable. So I feel like the future is the possibilities, and we're actually testing them now because we have to. So I think that's promising. I guess one other thing about kind of where we go is that this idea of, you know, we're in our heads so much and we're not in our bodies so much. We don't all know how we feel. And I think being closer to how we feel and being more present is actually a hugely important thing. We've had to like sit in it, right? We couldn't leave. And I think just being more able to be present is something that allows us to be more connected to each other. And I think that's really important, because I think sometimes we get really disconnected to each other in such busy lives.
I was just going to make a brief comment. And Susan, thanks for the shout out. So my job, I'm a psych nurse. I mean, like, that's what, you know, I consider myself. I think you nailed it. You know, we have to have an outlet. And I think that has been the challenge, you know. We need to find an outlet, you know, and whether it's, you know, a 10 minutes walk, 15 minutes of yoga, or whatever it is that you find that can settle you, that can center you, we need to do that. Because I tell my staff, it's not okay just to come to work, right? There has to be a balance. You have to have some level of balance. And I know that is easily said and done, but even me sharing with you this summer, I'm growing some plants, you know, I'm growing some tomatoes and stuff like that in my backyard. You know, I just got some pots, and that's what I'm doing for the summer. And it's very surreal when you get out there in the morning, you're watering your plants, your mind is clear. I don't have anything in my mind but just those plants, and seeing them grow and flowering. I mean, it's incredible. You know, so we all have to find some level of outlet to manage this situation. And Susan also said something critical. Some things may change and some things may not change for some period of time. So we have to be able to wrap our head around that. You know, even when we say we have a vaccine, does that mean that every 100% of the people are going to get it? No. There are some people, the anti-vaccine people out there. You know, you have your late bloomers that they want to see other people get the vaccine first before they come in. And I don't want to do doom and gloom, but if you look at flu season coming in the fall, and if you have COVID, that combination, you know, how do you manage that? How can one tell one from the other? Because they are almost similar if you look at some of the signs and symptoms. You know, so some things may not change as quickly as we want it to change, but allowing yourself to take a day at a time, be in control of what you are in control of, and certain things you just have to accept that you're not in control of it. And then just take that one day at a time and just deal with it. Because if not, it's going to consume you. You know, I'll share a quick story. I got a call from one of my staff members that they've tested positive for COVID, right, on the unit. And I'm like, okay, this was around 7 p.m. I was leaving the parking lot. And the first thing that came to me, I was like, oh my God. But I have to remember that I'm also dealing with a human being who has just been diagnosed. So it's not about the workplace yet. There's a level of empathy that we have to bring to the table and check on this individual, make sure they are okay and their family is okay. Before then, I can pivot to talking to the physicians that are in the employee health to figure out, okay, how do we get this information to our staff? How do we educate them? Their stress level, how do you manage them? You know, because now you have about 80, 100 staff that now have to get this information. How do you convey this to them? That you're not also telling about somebody's privacy. You know, it's very, very complicated, but we did work through it, and I'm here to tell you about it today. So there is a way, but you got to take one day at a time. You got to center yourself, and you got to manage that stress.
A little bit of a different way to answer the question is one of the things that we've realized, you know, with our team is that I don't know about y'all, but Zoom meetings are way more exhausting for me than like in-person meetings. It is something about being on camera for so long that it just like really took it out of our team and our team member. And I have Zoom fatigue to the extreme. And so one of the things that, you know, we kind of learned as a team in quarantine, but we're going to continue on, is just trying to reduce the number of meetings that we have and pushing those meetings to the margin of the day. So I don't know how many of y'all know a lot about like deep focus work, right? But you are going to get so much more done if you can sit down for a 3-hour block and deep dive into a task than if you can only work on it, you know, every other hour when you don't have a meeting. And as a side note, you're also going to get a lot more done if you put the phone away and like turn off all email notifications. And so we realized that, you know, we used to kind of haphazardly schedule meetings at my company. We'd be like, okay, you know, we need to meet up. Let's just do noon on Wednesday. But what that was doing was really like splitting up our schedules and making it impossible for my team members to not only take the time they need in the middle of the day, because that's something else with COVID. Sometimes it's 3 p.m. and you're like, I'm done. I cannot keep working today. Otherwise, it was just getting rid of their time that they could really focus on tasks. So we've intentionally focused on cutting down the number of meetings that we have, only having them if we absolutely need to. And if we do, putting them at the margins of the day so that you have that middle of the day so you can do what you need. And so that's like one actionable thing that we're definitely going to take away after this, because it's like too many Zoom meetings.
Okay. All right. So our next question that's in the Q&A is, what is the most important quality you look for in students trying to get into your specific fields? And again, I think this has popped up through some of your previous answers, but if anything's resonating or coming to mind, and what would be some best ways of showcasing these qualities to potential employers?
I think for me, 2 words: attitude and ability to learn, right? You don't have to be the best of the best, but if you're willing to learn, then the opportunity is there and you can grow. You know, and attitude is everything. You want to succeed, you want to do the work. Like somebody said, you have to work in a donut store for 6 months or whatever it takes. Willing, ability to do the work. I mean, those are the 2 things that I would look for in a candidate.
I'll add communication skills to the ability to want to do the work. I think whether it's writing or verbal skills or presentation skills or interpersonal skills, really being able to listen carefully and to be able to consolidate knowledge and come up with new ideas and be able to articulate them and communicate them really well. And that takes a lot of practice and figuring out what your unique approach is to that. But I think writing skills in my work, whether you're writing for the general public or you're writing for professionals or you're writing for academic journals, they're very different styles of writing, and really being honed at that and really learning the skills of being a good writer and also being a good presenter, and being able to consolidate knowledge so that you're not, it takes so long to get to the points that are really important to make. So that's one of the things we look for.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when I did hiring for a small research institute that I worked at in DC before joining the government, you know, what I looked for in resumes was I wanted to be able to pick up a resume and to read it and to say, you know, it makes complete sense why this person is applying for this position, right? So I can really understand why they would be attracted to this based on their experience, based on their education, and based on maybe the kind of unique features that make up who they are, right? So it wasn't, something coming out of the blue, and that's not to say that you can't, change your be adaptive, or, as Susan said, I think, have that kind of career trajectory that's not a straight line. But there's other things that you can do in writing your resume, in writing your cover letter too, that can be targeted towards the institution or to the position that you're applying to at any one time, right? So you can pull different experiences, or, put your education first, or put your work experience first, or change the way in which, the examples that you use in your resume, to be able to be more applicable to the organization that you're trying to apply for. And so that was always interesting and helpful for me as someone that was looking through maybe, hundreds of resumes at a time for interns or for full-time positions. And the other thing too, is kind of be unique in the types of opportunities that you're pursuing, that can build those relevant skills. So again, what I had mentioned, for me was kind of oral communication, written communication, and kind of research and analysis. So when I was a student, what I tried to do was, join different groups on Facebook or on other social media sites of different student symposium, or research seminars that were at different universities near Hopkins. And anytime they posted one related to, my area of interest, which was the Middle East, I would, submit a prospectus and try and go and speak at that university or speak at that event. And so that way, when I was applying for jobs that dealt with the think tank world, I could say, I had spoken at McGill University, at Virginia Tech, at a bunch of different universities on Middle East issues. And maybe that was something that I had that someone else didn't have, when we both also had it, internships or relevant language experience or something like that. So finding ways that you can, in your spare time, write for student journals, right? It doesn't have to be, the main newspaper or like a big well-known organization, right? Just having things that, someone read your work and decided that it was publishable on a website or in a blog or in a type of journal, that can be more than enough. Because I'll tell you, as, someone who was on the hiring side, I didn't really go into too much depth if trying to determine the credentials. If it was, hey, I wrote for the Yale Journal of International Affairs, I would maybe do a quick search just to make sure that was a real thing. But otherwise, you can kind of help to establish your bona fides pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that everyone else said, especially Susan's point. I am constantly, amazed at how few people actually have good writing skills. Just to put it frankly. I even, I was a TA for Introduction to Business at Hopkins, and even a lot of students don't know how to write in a concise manner and something, and there's a difference between being able to write an essay that's passable and being able to write content that you could put in front of a client, right? So the more you can improve your writing and communication skills, really want to underscore that. And then otherwise, the biggest thing that I look for, at least, is that you really give a damn about the problem that we are focused on, right? Our company involves advanced AI. We sell into governments. There's a ton of technology. But at the end of the day, we help entrepreneurs. And so everyone who gets hired into our company better really care about helping entrepreneurs for some reason. And so for any organization that you're applying to, there is the organization as an entity, but then there is the problem that the division is solving, or that the person you're applying to work for is solving. And so show that you care about that problem, because the solutions to that problem might change. All of a sudden we might pivot from using technology to being a very grassroots approach. And so show that you care about the problem that they are working on and that you're passionate about that. And I think that kind of conveys a deeper level of understanding about why you want to be there.
And I'll just add to this, kind of bringing the conversation and starting to wrap the conversation up, is employers are also looking for just generally resiliency, growth mindset, initiative. So a lot of the suggestions that our panelists have made today about taking initiative of seeking out opportunities, creating opportunities, building something, you know, finding groups and offering up your services, having conversations. You're in a moment right now where you're going to be asked about in an interview. How did you handle summer 2020? How did you handle this moment? And so even if an internship was canceled or an offer was rescinded, there are things that you can be doing, and employers will be understanding, but you also want to have a story that you can tell that shows the resiliency, the initiative that you showed in this time, so that it's not just the summer just happened and it disappeared. And so that's what we're wanting to do, is to bring this inspiration. So to wrap up our conversation, so thank you so much today. I just want to have one kind of last thought from each of you to kind of lead us out into action. If you could encourage one word or one action that you would encourage our participants to take about what actions you'll do after today's session for the poll, but for our panelists, what would you encourage everyone to do to take in empathizing with themselves, but also the community and those around them? So what would be one step you would encourage us to take in empathizing with ourselves and our mental health and our well-being, but also our communities?
So I would just say that, you know, we're all a work in progress. Nobody's perfect, right? We're all God's children. And so, you know, we all have to reflect within ourselves and see what we can do in this national conversation and dynamics about things that we want to change. And really, really important, this election coming, we always say, it's a cliche, oh, this election is more important than the previous 4 years. But we're at a crossroads. So please utilize your vote. There's not going to be a change if you don't vote. I mean, that's the only thing I have to say to you. So we can all complain and make the noise, but you have to go out there and cast that vote and make sure that you're casting the vote. All right. All the best to everyone, and please take one day at a time. Godspeed.
I guess I would say take this time to really self-reflect and figure out what you care about or what you might care about, right? Day-to-day life is usually very, very, very busy. You know, we're hopping from one task to the next, and it doesn't provide a lot of time for us to step back and really think about what do you care about and where do you want to have an impact? Because if you're working in a job that you care about or solving a problem in a space that you want to have an impact on, it's going to feel a lot better. And so I know it's so dumb to say now that we have all of this time, because I don't know about a lot of you, it does not feel like I got more time, but we do have a little bit more space for self-reflection, I think. And so I would take that space and really think about what are the areas that you're passionate about and use that to inform your career planning and where you go and seek new opportunities.
I'll just say maybe don't be afraid to fail, and also recognize that life is very long. So for example, you know, I started my dream position with the State Department with folks who were 23 and had just finished graduate school, all the way to folks who were in their mid to late 50s who were looking for a second or third career, right? So just because, you know, you might not get something or you might have to persist in pursuing something doesn't mean it's not meant to be. It just might not be what's meant to be at that, you know, at that point in your life. So keep persisting and you know, take every opportunity you can to put yourself in a better position to succeed at what you want in the future.
So just a couple things. I would say for yourself, vote. For others, make sure they vote, and make sure that all of your community is talking about the issues that are happening right now, and really get your friends to talk to their friends. Like really, this is the conversation. There's 130 days to the national election, something like that. It's not a lot of time. It's less than the time we've been in COVID. And so it's incredibly important that we all think really deeply about voting. The other thing I'd say is reach out to somebody that has meant something to you in your life that you maybe have lost contact with. I think that sometimes we don't realize the impact we have on others or they have on us. And when we are so busy, we don't have sometimes the time to go back and just say, thank you, how are you? And you really meant something. You meant something to me in a time that was really important to me. And I've had people call me and write me over the last couple months, and I've done the same. And I have to say, I feel so grateful for those relationships that somehow passed in time, you know, and so I think that's also something that we can do for ourselves and do for somebody else.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. Just wanted to share our polling results. Thank you to everybody for attending. It looks like we have a lot of people planning on joining our vision chat next week with Dave Evans and Bill Burnett, authors of Designing Your Life out of Stanford University. So that will be a wonderful vision chat led by Farouk Day, our Vice Provost for Integrative Learning and Life Design here at Johns Hopkins University. I encourage everyone to join our community conversation. We will have 4 prompts posted to the website where you registered for this alumni talk. If I could have one of my life design bots put the link in the chat, we will have the link there. So by noon tomorrow, you'll have the 4 prompts posted in the community conversation June month. And so all throughout the week up until next Thursday, we'll be engaging online with these prompts. We'll be putting out challenges for you to be thinking about and engaging in the month of June, of reframing, of empathizing with ourselves, with our community, and just really understanding where we are in this moment. So I encourage you to engage using the hashtag Redesign Your Future. And again, thank you to everybody for joining, for Reggie and Evan and Susan and Pava, thank you for taking your time. And for those that are listening in, we appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle, for hosting us. Very much appreciated.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
Be safe, everyone.
Yes.